There comes a time in life, often after 65, when the world starts to feel louder, but you begin to speak less. Not because you've run out of things to say, but because you've learned. Not every thought needs to be shared, not every opinion needs to be spoken, and not every silence needs to be filled. You may notice it in small moments. You sit quietly while others rush to talk. You listen but don't interrupt. You observe but don't correct. You smile even when you could respond with fire. And the older you get, the more you realize silence isn't a lack of wisdom, it's the shape wisdom often takes. You've spent decades speaking, teaching, defending, explaining, but now your presence says more than your words. This video isn't about saying nothing, it's about saying only what matters. And trusting that silence, when chosen with intention, can be more powerful than 100 well-phrased sentences. Because after 65, quiet is no longer emptiness. It's clarity, it's strength. It's the beautiful confidence of someone who no longer needs to prove anything to anyone. Let's explore together how your silence can become your power, and how, in saying less, you finally begin to be heard more clearly than ever before. There comes a time in life, often after 65, when the world starts to feel louder, but you begin to speak less. Not because you've run out of things to say, but because you've learned. Not every thought needs to be shared, not every opinion needs to be spoken, and not every silence needs to be filled. You may notice it in small moments. You sit quietly while others rush to talk. You listen, but don't interrupt. You observe, but don't correct. You smile even when you could respond with fire. And the older you get, the more you realize silence isn't a lack of wisdom, it's the shape wisdom often takes. You've spent decades speaking, teaching, defending, explaining, but now your presence says more than your words. This video isn't about saying nothing, it's about saying only what matters. And trusting that silence, when chosen with intention, can be more powerful than 100 well-phrased sentences. Because after 65, quiet is no longer emptiness, it's clarity, it's strength. It's the beautiful confidence of someone who no longer needs to prove anything to anyone. Let's explore together how your silence can become your power, and how, in saying less, you finally begin to be heard more clearly than ever before. You let the silence stretch, because you know the answer they need might be one they find themselves. And in that silence, you give them something better than advice: respect. I trust you to find your own way. I'm here, but I don't need to lead. In your younger years, you may have believed that speaking up was a form of strength, that if you disagreed, you had to say so, that if something was wrong, you had to correct it. But now, you smile more, you speak less. You pick your moments. Because you've learned, most people aren't actually looking to be corrected. Many arguments aren't worth the energy, and sometimes peace is louder than being right. You no longer explain yourself to those determined to misunderstand you. You no longer debate just to be heard, because you know who you are, and that's enough. For years, you may have blamed yourself for how things turned out. You took responsibility for people's choices. You tried to hold relationships together. You felt bad when things fell apart, even if it wasn't your doing. But now you can breathe and say, that wasn't mine to fix. That wasn't mine to carry. That wasn't my failure. You begin to separate your role from other people's paths. And in that separation, peace returns. Something powerful happens when you stop fixing. Conversations become lighter. Your body relaxes, your breath deepens. You feel less responsible for everyone's emotions and more responsible for your own peace. You learn that stepping back isn't the same as walking away. It's making room for others to grow and for you to finally rest. You spent decades holding everything together. Now it's okay to simply hold yourself. Next time someone comes to you with a problem or story, try this. Pause, breathe, ask softly, do you want my advice or just someone to listen? Let them decide. Let yourself listen. And if you don't know what to say, that's okay too. A quiet nod, a kind smile, a moment of shared silence may be exactly what they needed. You don't need to rescue anyone. You only need to be present. Maybe when you were younger, people expected you to have it all together. Maybe no one ever told you don't have to fix this. It's okay to let things be. You're allowed to rest. So now you give that gift to others by saying less, by softening, by being the calm in the room, not the fixer. And in doing so, you also give that gift to yourself. You don't have to hold everything together anymore. You just have to hold space for others, for yourself, for peace. Part two, quiet gives you control of your energy. Protecting your peace is a form of wisdom, not selfishness. One of the most profound shifts that comes with age is this. You begin to realize your energy is not unlimited. In your younger years, you gave freely time, attention, advice, emotion. You rushed into conversations, arguments, tasks, often feeling responsible for fixing what was broken or holding space for everyone else's needs. But after 65, you've learned something that changes everything. I don't have to spend my energy on everything and everyone anymore. I can choose where it goes, carefully, gently, wisely. And one of the most powerful ways to protect that energy is through silence. Not every comment deserves your reaction. Not every misunderstanding deserves your explanation. Not every invitation deserves a yes. Not every argument deserves your peace. You begin to understand the power of pausing, of breathing, of letting the moment pass without getting pulled into it. Silence becomes your boundary, not to shut people out, but to protect what matters inside. You can't pour from a cup that's always spilling, and you can't live fully if your peace is always leaking. In a noisy world where everyone wants to be seen, heard, and validated, quiet becomes your sanctuary. You stop chasing validation. You stop explaining yourself to people who have already made up their minds. You stop justifying your decisions because you know, I don't owe the world an explanation for my peace. Instead, you retreat inward, not in fear, but in confidence, because silence gives you the chance to hear your own voice again, to feel what's true for you, to separate your needs from the noise around you. And in that quiet space, you begin to recover the most sacred thing you own, your energy. As you grow older, you become more sensitive to what drains you, not out of judgment, but out of self awareness. You notice who talks constantly but never listens, who brings drama to every conversation, who always needs something but rarely gives anything back, who leaves you feeling more tired after every call. And you learn that pulling back isn't cruel. It's an act of survival, of clarity, of protection. I'm not avoiding you because I don't care. I'm choosing silence because I do, just not at the cost of myself. As with your home, you begin to declutter your inner life. You no longer carry guilt just to keep the peace. You no longer replay conversations in your head. You no longer hold on to resentment like unpaid emotional rent. Instead, you choose emotional simplicity, clear yes or no, a pause instead of a reaction, a smile instead of a defense, a boundary instead of a battle. Because now you know, I don't need to win, I only need to feel whole. When you're no longer reacting to everything, you have the space to ask, do I really want to say this? Will this bring peace or more conflict? Is this conversation worth my heart tonight? And often, the answer is no. And that's okay, because not responding doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're wise enough to know my peace is more valuable than being right, and my energy is sacred now. Try this each morning or before a conversation. Sit in silence for 1 minute. Ask yourself, where do I feel heavy today? Who drains me lately? Where do I want to place my attention today? Choose one area to protect and one to nurture. Let silence be your compass. You don't have to respond immediately. You don't have to say yes to every call. You don't have to explain why you need space. You only have to listen to what your body already knows. I deserve to feel light. I deserve to feel safe. I deserve to feel whole. You've done your part. You've spoken enough. You've listened, helped, corrected, explained, carried. Now your energy belongs to you. And silence? Silence is how you keep it safe. So the next time you feel the pull to answer too quickly, give too much, or hold more than your heart can carry, pause and ask, is this worth my energy? Or is this a moment for quiet? Then smile, breathe, and choose peace, because you've earned that right, not through silence that hides, but through silence that protects what you love most, yourself. Part three, people listen more when you speak less. The quiet power that grows when your words are chosen with care. When you were younger, you may have felt pressure to speak often, to fill every silence, to be part of every conversation, to make sure your voice was heard in a world that moved quickly and didn't wait for you to catch up. You may have believed that the more you said, the more you'd be understood. But with time, and especially after 65, something shifts. You begin to notice that people don't always listen when you talk a lot. But when you speak less, when you wait, When your words are few but meaningful, people lean in. They listen more closely. They remember what you say because you're no longer speaking to fill the air, you're speaking from depth. We often assume that power lies in volume, in the person who talks the most, in the one who dominates the room. But in reality, true presence is built in quiet consistency. When you speak only when needed, people notice, they pay attention, they sense that what's coming next matters. Your silence becomes the frame that holds the value of your words. And in a world full of noise, your stillness makes your voice louder without ever raising your tone. In your younger years, words may have rushed out of you, defending your choices, trying to be understood, offering advice too quickly, arguing because you felt unheard. But now you take your time. You pause, you let the room breathe. You've lived long enough to know that sometimes the wisest thing to say is nothing. The most powerful presence is the one who listens, and the clearest message is spoken without haste. You don't speak from reaction anymore, you speak from reflection, and that difference changes everything. Saying less doesn't just give you peace, it gives others space to think. When you stay quiet, people hear their own thoughts more clearly. They feel less judged. They learn to process their own emotions. They may even come to conclusions they wouldn't have reached if you had spoken first. You're not withholding wisdom, you're inviting self discovery. You're not trying to be the loudest in the room, you're trying to make space for truth to rise. That's not silence out of fear, it's silence out of confidence. When you do speak, your words are seasoned. They don't come from theory, they come from grief you've carried, love you've protected, mistakes you've made, people you've forgiven, lessons you've paid for with time. So when you say, "This too shall pass, be kind anyway, let it go," you don't have to answer right away. It's not just advice, it's wisdom, and people can feel that. You've spoken with your life, so your voice doesn't need to shout, it just needs to show up. When you remove the noise, what's left is clarity. And clarity, spoken gently, is unforgettable. The child who once rolled their eyes when you lectured now stops and thinks when you say one quiet sentence. The friend who always talked over you now pauses when you finally speak. The younger person who once ignored your presence now comes to you, not for chatter, but for calm, because your words are no longer frequent. They're focused. They come with the weight of someone who's thought deeply, lived honestly, and now only says what's truly worth saying. One of the most liberating things about saying less is this: you realize you don't have to explain yourself to everyone. You don't have to convince people who aren't ready to understand. You don't need to defend every decision you make. Some people will only hear what they want to. And your silence is not agreement, it's wisdom choosing where to spend itself. You stop repeating yourself. You stop over explaining. You stop justifying your truth. And in doing so, you find peace. Before you respond, gently pause and ask, is this coming from reaction or wisdom? Will this help or will it just add noise? Am I speaking to be heard or to bring clarity? If the answer isn't peace, maybe silence is more powerful than words this time. Because not every silence is empty. Some silences are full of understanding. At this stage in life, you've earned something rare: the ability to be heard without raising your voice, to be respected without repeating yourself, to be remembered for the words you didn't say, because you spoke only when it truly mattered. So say less, mean more. Let your quiet carry the wisdom of everything you've lived through. You've already said enough in this life. Now, let your stillness say the rest. Part 4. Silence becomes a sacred space for you, where you stop explaining and start simply being. There was a time in life when silence felt uncomfortable. It felt like something was missing, a void that needed to be filled, with words, with noise, with movement. But now, as you grow older, silence starts to feel different. It no longer feels empty, it feels full, full of peace, full of knowing, full of presence. It becomes a space where you're no longer performing, no longer proving, no longer reaching for validation. You're just being fully, quietly, and freely. And that is sacred. In the noise of life, between the responsibilities, the conversations, the decisions, it's easy to lose touch with yourself, to forget what you truly feel, what you truly need, what you've been quietly carrying. But in silence, the masks fall away. You're no longer playing a role. You're no longer the peacemaker, the parent, the provider, the planner. You're just you, no labels, no expectations. And in that space, you remember, I am enough, even when I say nothing. You don't have to be entertaining. You don't have to offer your opinion. You don't have to be impressive. After 65, you realize some of the most profound moments happen in quiet glances. Some of the deepest healing comes in stillness. Some of the greatest presence requires no words at all. You sit on the porch, you watch the wind move the leaves, you take a sip of tea and listen to your breath. And in that silence, there is peace. The more noise I release, the more truth I receive. You've carried a lifetime of conversations inside you, regrets, arguments, what you should have said, what you wish you hadn't. But now in silence, you begin to loosen your grip. You start to whisper to yourself, I don't have to carry this anymore. I don't need to keep reliving that memory. I'm allowed to rest now. Silence becomes a quiet graveyard for things that no longer serve you and a quiet garden for what you're still growing. It holds space for release. You used to feel the urge to explain your choices, to justify your boundaries, to make sure others understood your decisions. But now, you simply do what's right for you. You say no without guilt. You stay home without apology. You turn inward without asking for permission. And that is freedom. Peace doesn't need to shout to be real, it simply needs to be felt by you. More than just a mood, silence affects your health. When you embrace quiet, you give your body space to lower your blood pressure, slow your heart rate, calm your nervous system, heal emotional wounds you didn't know were still raw. And in that soft, wordless space, you find something surprising. You're not lonely. You're not missing anything. You're finally whole. You don't need hours of silence to feel its gift. Just 5 minutes a day can change the way you move through life. Try this. Sit in your favorite chair, by a window, or in a quiet room. Turn off all noise, TV, phone, voices. Breathe in slowly for 4 seconds and out for 6. Say silently, I don't need to speak to be present. I am allowed to be quiet. My stillness is sacred. Just sit, listen, feel. Even if your mind races at first, don't worry. Keep showing up. Silence will meet you there. What happens when you make silence your home? You begin to walk slower, speak softer, respond later, or not at all. You begin to realize you don't have to react to everything. You don't have to explain yourself. You don't have to be available all the time. And the people around you, they start to sense your peace. They start to mirror your calm. They start to feel safe, not because you're saying much, but because you're anchored. And that stillness becomes your true strength. Silence is not empty. It's the space where your spirit breathes. You've spent a lifetime giving your voice away to work, to children, to relationships, to survival. But now you reclaim it, not by speaking louder, but by choosing when to speak at all. Silence is your boundary. Silence is your sanctuary. Silence is where you stop being the world's echo and start being your own home. You don't owe the world noise. You owe yourself peace. Let the silence carry you home to yourself, to your breath, and to the gentle power that was always there, waiting. Part 5. The power of quiet is the power of presence. You don't have to say much to be felt deeply. There's a beautiful truth that reveals itself with age. The most powerful people in the room are not always the loudest. They are often the quietest. They don't interrupt. They don't compete. They don't seek attention. They simply show up fully with calm eyes, a soft heart, and a grounded soul. And in doing so, they are felt more than heard. That's the power of presence. And after 65, it becomes your greatest strength. Presence is what remains when you no longer chase validation. You no longer speak to be admired. You no longer respond to prove your intelligence. You no longer explain just to be accepted. Instead, you sit. You breathe. You observe. You let your energy speak before your mouth ever does. And people feel it in the way you listen, in the way you pause before answering, in the way your silence holds space without pressure. You don't have to say much when your spirit already says everything. In your younger years, connection often came through storytelling, laughs, long conversations, animated explanations. But now it comes differently through shared silence, a knowing look, a gentle hand on someone's shoulder, a presence that says, I'm here. You don't have to be anyone else. There's a quiet magic in you now because you're not trying to impress. You're simply showing up authentically, honestly, peacefully. People feel safe around you because you're not rushing to be understood. You've noticed it, haven't you? People begin to open up around you more. Strangers tell you their stories. Family members come to you, not for answers, but for your calm. Why? Because your quiet says, I won't judge. I'm not here to fix you. You can be real with me. You've become a sanctuary, not through speeches, but through your stillness. The less you try to be someone, the more others are allowed to simply be themselves. You know that what you don't say is often more powerful than what you do. You could correct them, but you don't. You could add more to the story, but you let it rest. You could win the debate, but you choose the peace instead. Why? Because you understand something the world still hasn't caught up to. Silence can be love. Silence can be boundaries. Silence can be wisdom. Silence can be enough. And now you are enough without needing to prove it. The next time you enter a room, try this. Breathe deeply before speaking. Smile softly. Say less, but mean every word. Watch how others respond. Notice how your stillness changes the tone. Notice how your calm becomes contagious. Notice how presence replaces performance. You're not there to take space. You're there to hold it. And that is the new kind of power that grows only with time. You've lived many lives through your words, teaching, comforting, explaining, defending, but now you enter the season of presence where your eyes speak, your silence supports, and your being, just as you are, is your message. Let your quiet lead the way. Let your breath guide your truth. Let your presence be your power. Because at this stage in life, your worth doesn't come from how much you say, but how deeply you show up. You've spent decades speaking. You've spoken to teach, to guide, to protect, to survive. You've spoken when your voice shook. You've spoken when no one listened. You've spoken to defend yourself, to stand up for others, and to hold broken things together. But now you enter a softer chapter, one where you no longer need to say everything because you've already lived it. And your presence now holds more truth than any sentence ever could. There is power in your pause. There is wisdom in your restraint. There is healing in the silence you choose, not because you have nothing to say, but because you finally know what's worth saying. And more importantly, what isn't. You don't need to speak to be heard. You don't need to explain to be understood. You don't need to prove to be powerful. Your quiet now is not emptiness. It is depth. It is dignity. It is the strength of someone who has walked through storms and now chooses peace. So let your stillness be your anchor. Let your breath be your boundary. Let your quiet be your gift to yourself and to the world that is finally ready to listen. You have nothing to prove. You are already enough, and your silence says so. If this message spoke to you, like this video to help others discover the quiet power of presence. Share it with someone who's learning to speak less and live more. Subscribe to True Senior Wisdom for weekly reflections on aging gently, deeply, and with meaning. Thank you for being here, and may your next words, when they come, be light, honest, and few. Because now, you no longer speak to be seen. You speak because your silence has already been heard.